3 p.m. UK. You can set your clock by our timekeeping, I believe, because I think we landed exactly on the hour there to start this LinkedIn Live today. Welcome, 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 everybody who's joining us and everybody that I see on my screen as well. It's so wonderful to be here. Let's find out who's here. Let's get started on this topic and make the most of this time. And let's find out where you are dialing in from. Aruna, could you start?
Thanks, Richard. Thanks for inviting me here. I'm very excited to be with the stellar panel members. In terms of my background, I have over 21 years of experience working in data analytics space. I worked for companies such as SAS, which is a analytical company, worked for two of the four big banks in Australia, CBA and Westpac, and more recently in AMP Financial Services before starting at HCL. In HCL, I head the AI and data science space, looking after their Asia Pacific and Middle East region based at Sydney. I'm highly passionate about AI and all things AI, ethical AI, responsible AI. In terms of my educational background, I've got my MBA and Master of Data Science. So what do I do? Outside of my work, I'm passionate about AI, so I try to write informative blogs, storytelling, animated videos, speeches, all about demystifying AI and how AI is transforming the business. I'm also a mentor. I write guest blogs for Swiss Cognitive, which is a global AI hub. And I'm also very excited to do blogs for MKAI as well, probably on this very topic that we are discussing today. There you go. I've got a topic for my blog. Also, I'm quite passionate about women and their representation is technology, AI, and data science. I'm part of few women's group. I lead my women's connect group within my company. I'm an advisor for a women's group called Thousand Eyes on Me. I'm also a part of the exciting women's panel, MKI Women Leadership. We've got a very talented women leaders there and had a good time last week and hope to have more of those. So that's about me. I'll shut up now.
You are very welcome. I heard the Women in MKAI leadership meeting went well. Aruna, you are a formidable force. You're joining us from Australia, which is incredible because it's so late. And we must never compare resumes, you and I, because yours is so much better than mine. So
I take it as a compliment, but
sure. You've got an
sure.
amazing CV, Aruna. It's really, really impressive. Lavina, welcome from South Africa, right?
Yeah, South Africa, representing Africa for today. So thank you so much. A little bit about me, being involved in tech and economics and psychology for about 20 odd years. And I'm fondly known as the AI mom and someone that actually speaks Africa. So yeah, happy to be here.
I'll call you my AI sister, if that's okay. I think you're about the same age as me.
Absolutely.
You're very, very welcome. It's great to be here. So that's continent number 2 that we got to so far. Let's see how we can do. Vibhav, you're next on my screen. If you could say hello.
Hi everyone, my name is Vibhav. I am a intellectual property rights lawyer based out of New Delhi, India. I do in IP, I do all types of IP, patents, copyright, trademarks as a litigator. On the AI side, I'm an AI enthusiast. I spend some amount of my time thinking on AI. I volunteer at certain organizations such as For Humanity, also at MKAI. My goal is to bring a non technical perspective to issues of artificial intelligence purely from a general layman perspective. And much like the fantastic panel that I have the honor of being with, it's about simplifying all things AI. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to be here with you. And finally, Smriti, where are you representing today? And tell us a bit about you.
So I work in Stockholm, but I'm stuck in India thanks to the pandemic. I currently am the head of artificial intelligence at Earth Bank, and I work towards climate change, reduced inequalities, reducing poverty, economic development, etc. I also work towards mental health and physical health using AI as well as open source AI. So that would be it about me. And anyone can feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, which I use a lot nowadays.
Wonderful. These are all amazing people to follow on LinkedIn. I can absolutely confirm that. And Smriti, you are very, very welcome. So myself here in Milton Keynes, that's at least 4 continents today. So I think we're doing well to represent planet Earth today. We'll say a quick hello to Niraj, who's arrived. Harry is here. Karen, Jazel from the team. Marissa, great to see you. Jerome as well. Very, very nice to see you too. Vibhav, we've got 55 minutes on the clock. So let's open this thing up. Let's look into Pandora's box and let's get this conversation opened up if you can get us started.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Richard. So what we're discussing today, and the topic is what will it take to solve the bias problem in AI? I think that I'm going to do three things. One, give a layman perspective of bias. Two, give a short how it might be solved, what will it take, and three, open up the questions for the panel. The first, for the AI enthusiasts and people thinking on AI, bias is an issue that comes up in AI very often. To give you best way to understand its examples, in the legal space, algorithm used in the US, it predicted how likely were particular offenders likely to reoffend when they were trying to decide a particular in the criminal justice system. The algorithm predicted one particular race had a higher chance of reoffending than the other. So that's one use of AI. Second, in hiring, they would, when in the hiring algorithm, an algorithm was used, it preferred one gender over the other. In loans, when you're deciding credit worthiness of a particular individual, there also a particular race, a particular type of people were preferred over the other. The point being, bias is a factor that is present in artificial intelligence. To simplify that term as well, take it as pattern detection models that are detecting patterns in streams of data. And when bias impacts, what in one line, it AI can reduce bias, possibly making it automation moving away from human biases. But if bias is present in your model, if it's present in artificial intelligence, it can amplify, perpetuate existing inequalities. Coming to the question, what will it take to solve the bias problem, if it is a problem? One, I think it is definitely that we have to understand that bias is contextual. So its application of an AI in a particular area might give you the correct result, but if taken out of context, applied in the another space, it might be a biased result. Two, how will you solve it? The answer again is not homogeneous, because it depends again on context. You could probably need to look at local solutions for solving the bias problem. So the framing of the problem is contextual. The answer is probably contextual, just my views of understanding it. We need to create awareness, because and which is why forums like these are fantastic. Every country, every place seeking to adopt AI is not at the same place of the conversation. Somewhere the focus could be to develop the AI model with other factors at the back burner. So awareness is important.
Yeah.
Fourth, you have to then, if we have to solve it, which hopefully we'll discuss, there there has to be a pragmatic desire, commercial sense to solve the problem. That's an important factor. May not be the entire picture, but that's one point. And the final aspect is, if you would, if for all, again, for all the AI enthusiasts here, if you dig deeper, one aspect that usually comes in is that data is not representative. And I would like to take that one little thought, and I'm sure it'll come up in our panel discussion as well, is that if we have real world data, would that, and if it was completely representative in the sense it represented exactly as the world it is today, and you're solving it, will that make it free from bias? And finally, I know I've taken a little time to quickly open up for this fantastic panel the 5 questions that I want to ask. One, can we completely eliminate bias in artificial intelligence, or is the conversation about bias mitigation? Is the question right? Two, what technological tools can we use to solve the bias problem? Three, third point which I already covered, that if you have real world data and if it is completely representative, does that mean it will be free from bias? Four, whose problem is it to solve this? Is it the data scientist? Is it the CEO? Is it the government? Is it courts? Is it civil society? Or is there some other profession called AI bias solvers that needs to be born? And finally, if it is a multidisciplinary solution, who is going to be on that team? What skill sets do you need? So that's my initial thoughts to get this conversation started. Looking
Okay,
forward.
lucky I had a coffee. So here we go. Number one, is it bias mitigation or solving it? 2, the tech tools. 3, real world data that represents those it's serving as helpers. Whose problem is it and who's on the team? 5 areas. Hello to Deborah as well. Hello to Amar. Hello to Alexandra from the court. Marissa asking about the Women in MKAI Leadership Group. That's one for Karen. We have 2 nominated VentureBeat Women in AI Rising Stars here. We have Lavina and we have Karen Baraldo, who's on the chat. So we are, again, well represented. Lavina, I want to come to you first because there's quite a clever nuance that Vibhav's picking up in his first question here, that our title of this is not how do we remove bias. It's not saying how do we take bias out. This is a bit like, Gotham City. We know we're never going to get crime to zero, right? But we're asking the question, the linguistics here, what does it take to solve the bias problem? So in a way, this doesn't actually necessarily mean it's about bias. We're asking, what do we do about the problem that is caused by bias? And that problem, you'll tell me now perhaps, what is it? Prejudices? Discriminatory actions? What is the problem that we're trying to solve?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a combination of prejudice, culture, the non-inclusion that we've had and we've allowed to happen over centuries of time. And, we have a simple thing like biasness within ourselves. I mean, nobody told me I was born with biasness, but it's a thing that I've learned now to accept and to understand that I need to reflect upon and I need to perhaps change. And then if we dig a little bit deeper, we have a thing called unconscious biasness, right? Which continues to evolve every nanosecond as much as, our cognitive synapses allows it to. And, given that, there's been some thinking that perhaps some biasnesses are actually necessary to create the overall fairness in data, to create the overall fairness within algorithms, to create the overall fairness in humans alike. So I think it's actually a combination of a lot of things, right? Because we have ourselves as individuals, and then we amplify that out to families, to friends, to communities, to schools, to work, to the bigger areas, and then eventually we stop at the epitome of us as humanity. And in between all of that, if I have 163 odd biasness that I'm born with, or have inherited, amplify that to 7 billion people, and we got a whopper of a situation.
We have. Thank you, Lavina, for unpacking some of that. Aruna, what would your take be on that same question?
Yeah, I'm just want to, take on what Lavina was saying. To me, bias is actually a good thing. And I'll say, if you look at the information flow that is coming to us every day, and if you have to, think through everything and make a decision, we probably will be there forever, not making decisions, not getting on with our lives. So our brains have been very smart enough to take that snap decisions, and sort of looking at, some sort of having some sort of prejudice or some sort of conceived, observation about something, and then they make the decision and then we get on with their life. So where the problem becomes is those biases which we have consciously or unconsciously, as Ravina was saying, is we take it to when we are framing the problem in AI system, right? When we are framing the problem, and when we trying to collect the data, where do we collect the data, how we collect the data, how we prepare the data, and even how we build this AI system. I think that's where it becomes a problem, and it can lead to unintentional consequences. I just wanted to sort of give an example just to iterate how sort of bias can impact. If you take example in the healthcare industry, if I wanted to build an AI system to detect a disease, or you wanted to treat somebody, and I go and build this beautiful AI model, feed it with all the input data sets. But I did not include a particular diversity by a particular minority group into that AI model. So now I'm all good, right? Good results, and I'm going live and productionizing it. And you have this patient coming in, and he is from that little minority group that we have not included. And most likely, that model is not going to detect that he's got a disease, or that we need to treat him immediately. And it's got, as we know, as the dire consequences there. He can die because we are not taken the treatment at the right time. So as AI has is used everywhere, right? So I've given an example of healthcare, finance. We are recommending financial products and investment products. You look at utilities, how to optimize power usage. You look at agriculture, how do I detect the crop disease, or even in retail, how do I optimize my online experience. AI is used everywhere and in every industry, and I think it's our responsibility to make sure the AI systems that we build is diverse, inclusive, neutral, and also protects the human rights. So that's sort of nutshell I wanted to sort of say here.
Thank you so much for those. I've got a couple of things I want to dig in there from what you've said, but let's bring everybody into the conversation. So, Smriti, there's a question here about what constitutes bias and the areas that's open to interpretation. So by all means, you can take that one, or if you'd rather contribute to what you've been hearing so far into this conversation, please do that. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so absolutely, I agree with what Lavina and Aruna said. So another important point here is that like we have algorithmic bias and we have societal bias. So algorithms essentially learn from people, and it's us who basically contribute towards any type of bias. For example, we discussed that Vibhav and yourself are interested in cricket. So if we consider an example of sports, like how commentators used to talk about white athletes and black athletes. When it comes to white athletes, like the discussion was mostly around their abilities, their talent, and when it came to black athletes, it was mostly about their physical attributes. So like this is probably like a small thing, but then when this was analyzed, I came across the study which analyzed 1400 something game broadcasts for like a couple of decades back. And this like the sort of bias in the language, it persists to the present day. And therefore the data set itself reflects a problematic language. Now when we train a model on this data set, we are supposed to get some sort of bias. So when it comes to this particular problem, I think the solution is, maybe it'll take some time, but it's pretty straightforward, which is to gather different experiences and ideas into the workplace. So diversity is the key here. If we have people from different diverse backgrounds, race, gender, experience, culture, and we inherently ask them for their experiences, questions, like everyone's involved, then we can reduce this sort of bias, for example. So if we have like one problem, we have to go and dive deep in to find out what the solution could be. Okay.
Thank you, Smitty. Yes, you're absolutely right. And that diversity is so fascinating, and it shows up in such strange ways. Ati from Vodacom, speaking later on at our forum, she may share this story later on about the consortiums of women in South Africa that were buying from distributors and manufacturers, and they were buying a lot of personal hygiene products from there. So, of course, on their supermarket receipt, there's no hygiene products. And there was a board of white men saying, okay, what do we sell these people to, get them clean? And it's like, just absurd that they can't see that there's just different buying habits to what they're used to. She's got so many more of these, and they're just bizarre to hear. when you have this narrow perspective, when you don't see the fullness of the data. So a quick hello to some others there. So I think we sorted out some of the audio issues now. Hopefully that sounds good if we manage our mutes. So Sam, great to see you. Trisha as well with that question. A couple of LinkedIn users who have got their settings on that don't appear in StreamYard. But if you want to say who you are, like Mike has done from lovely Cornwall, then that's great. Olayemi here again, which is great. And Harry, thank you for your comment just then about working on facial analysis and finding the bias there on darker skin groups. Vibhav, I want to come to something Aruna said, and she, of course, may want to pitch in on this as well in just a moment, but I'll come to you first, Vibhav. We were talking about what's needed in the data. My immediate thought was that sounds like a financial issue. That sounds like it needs more budget and that projects need more. And we know forever in the corporate world, it's always about efficiency, isn't it? And managing costs and so on effectively so that, you do enough and you get the job done without having to spend too much. So what's the ask here if we need more data and we need more balanced data? It's just more cost in the project, isn't it?
Right, so that's a good question. So I think there are 2-3 things that come to my mind. One is that we need to know what is the objective or what is it that you seek to achieve through your algorithm. That's one. Two, uh, y- I don't think that you also have to align that with your business objective, right? It cannot be that you have all sorts of you have a lot of data and then you just train your algorithm based on the existence of data. Again, the connection is what you're trying to achieve. Do you have the data with that effect? And then there's this, of course, big data has been one of the ways in which it has been where algorithms have been trained, and it seems to be a resource point. But there's another way of doing it, which is that if you are very clear, and I mean that we don't know if it's worked or not, but there's some, if you're clear about what result you want to train your AI on, if you give it good quality data, if you give it and you train it on the specific result you're looking on, then possibly one could get with an answer that you may not need large amounts of data. But this is a domain of a data scientist and a machine learning engineer tied with the business objective and how you want to solve the problem. There are pros and cons in each decision. It's not a magic solution. It can't be that I have immense amount of data and I put the data on the table and metaphorically, if I put the data on the table and I have an algorithm, or I have these perfect results and I just feed this little amount of data and I have the perfect algorithm. I think again it'll be contextual. So the resource question is right. The way, probably what I've understood is that the way AI has been developed currently requires a significant amount of resources, but there is potential to move away and use resources in a manner less as they're being used right now. But how that is practically done is a question that I would defer to people working in the space.
That's understandable. Lavina, let me come to you and back to Aruna again, because I'm going to bring in a little bit of conversation about data. Say hello to Beanish here, working on robotic judges. Love to hear more about that. Shana from NASA. Wow, that's great to have you here as well. You're very, very welcome. So here's a stat, Lavina, I want you to kind of react to when I say it. And I did prime you on this beforehand, so I can't feel too bad about landing this on you. So this was ImageNet data. It was shared in Merva Hickok's course from about 6 months ago. So I'm sure, sure these things are always changing. But this was the stat at the time. The US contributes 45% of all the data to ImageNet. But the US as a population makes up 4% of the world. So 4% of the world is contributing 45% of the data. China and India, if you want the comparison, are contributing 3% of the data. So it's almost an inverse relationship. So 36% of the population contributing 3% of the data, 4% of the population contributing 45% of the data. It's these kind of problems, isn't it, that we're starting out on the wrong foot, aren't we?
Absolutely. And to add more stats to that, if we zone in on genetics, Africa is not represented in terms of any genomic representation in terms of data sets yet, because nobody has that. So that's supposed to be the next gold mine. But yeah, absolutely. I think, it's definitely setting us off on the wrong footing. When we look at this in completeness, we're wanting to obviously aim for a continuous intelligence system that is distributed, right? That is allowing us to plug in anything at any point in time, and have the data adjust to our models, have the data adjust to, our thinking, have the data then adjust to our business decisions that need to be made within the organization. And again, I think this is all underpinned by cultural diversity and having more of that represented. So yeah, absolutely. Data sets is one aspect where we absolutely lack, and I think there's room for improvement in terms of that. But I think that's still just a small piece of the bigger problem. In terms of, not just understanding what data is, not understanding the true potential of what it is, not understanding what we're actually dealing with, right? I mean, imagine you giving a little kid a toy gun, right? Okay, I know, bad example, but it's the same sort of scenario. They don't know what to do with it, so they'll kind of fidget and fiddle around with it until they figure that out, right? And that's kind of the scenario that we find ourselves in, where we need to be able to deconstruct biasness, where we need to be able to deconstruct the ethical constraints, because that in essence is going to help make AI, or sort of not make AI, but sort of unleash the true potential, or unleash the beauty part of AI.
We often draw comparisons to social media, and I'll stay with you just for one moment, Lavina. Now a decade on from social media really emerging on mobile phones, we recognize the harm and the damage that algorithms have done, and there was the Cambridge Analytica scandal, and we know that algorithms pushed kind of indignation and rage articles and so on. But are we missing that here in AI? I mean, should a data set that is that unrepresented, representative, I can't say it, of the people that needs to serve, I mean, should that even be legal?
Yeah, great question. Short answer or long answer, Richard?
What's the headline? Does we need this kind of legislation that says we know the damage downstream of having unrepresentable data, therefore there has to be some laws on this?
Absolutely, and I think we also have a parity that sits within the law, right? Where we have certain data sets within medical, like age, gender, and those sort of things, which is deemed acceptable and non-private or very private. And then you go to the flip side of it, where we talk about fintech, and there it's a complete different set of rules. So understanding how data actually plays within the context of each of the different industries become tenfold important, right? I mean, we sit with ourselves at the moment where we know we sit with too much of information, where we know we don't get and derive enough meaning from all of the information we're sitting with. Yet we know that we need to be able to act fast and furious, right? And at the same point, we meant to remember certain of this data, right? So that's just us as individuals. Now we amplify that to a company, and then a country. So policies and laws are definitely that guiding force that needs to help drive the bigger picture in terms of not only adoption, but also very much the trust factor in AI. I mean, we can go into a lot of cultural sort of examples, around where we can showcase, where people aren't comfortable with having their data transferred outside their actual country or actually outside their premises. These things are still very true and real to date. So the biasness that we need to eradicate is definitely supported by the adoption of more policies and frameworks. So I tried to keep that short, Richard.
You did well. A tricky question. We'll say hello to Atif as well, who's joined us. We've got a few more LinkedIn users who don't remain anonymous, but you're very welcome. Siva's here as well. And some great debate there going on the comments. Aruna, we've touched on health data quite a bit here, and I'd like to come back to that because I wonder if it might be slightly different from other data that we need to work on. If we put health to one side for a moment, what sort of role do you see for synthetic data being used in this data set, either to reduce the bias or to maybe bring the cost down of the project that allows for more resourcing that might be necessary? Just ask you to unmute if that's okay, Aruna, and just repeat what you said if that's all right.
Okay, sorry. Okay.
Not at all. Fine.
Thanks, Peter. That was so Richard. Very good question. I just wanted to go back to Vibhav when you were saying about the how the data, how to reduce the cost and all that. There is two factors I wanted to sort of mention. One is the data foundation. For AI, data foundation is very important. One of the ways is that, I call it the maturity of an organization. Is an organization matured for doing AI? For that, we need a data foundation. So having the right data at the right place, with the right quality, with good governance and ownership and those sort of things is quite important. If you have that data foundation, then yes, you will get good value out of the AI. The outcomes will be good, and as well the cost will not be exorbitant because you do have the good quality of data. The second thing I wanted to say is on the synthetic data, which you just raised, Richard. That is the new thing that is coming up. There is a quite a for AI to be effective. It needs a lot of data. It needs we are talking about diversity. We wanted to make sure every section of the our globe is being represented, and so that means you need more and more data. But the challenge is it is very expensive to get the data, and it's very expensive to run with the data. Plus, it costs a lot to actually even get the data. So there is, because of all these limitations, we are getting with what we have, and that also influences the bias, and you're going into this vicious cycle. Synthetic data is also, a lot of industries are coming into it. It's like seeing yourself in the mirror. It is a digital way of replicating the real data, which has got all the key aspects that you would need in a real data, but it's just that human generated. It's less expensive, and more importantly, some of the challenges we face right now about privacy and data protection, and you talked about people are very resisting, hesitant to have the data moved out from, and all of these challenges. Plus, if you want to have a good representation of the data, diversified data, so that your AI models are performing well, then synthetic data is the way to go. In fact, I think every company, everyone should have this and start using synthetic data rather than looking for real world data. I think that's a solution, and it's becoming a big market now. A lot of vendors, a lot of providers out there are venturing into this one. But I'm quite happy that we are able to do this.
We need another blog post from you on that, Aruna. Yeah, so this is interesting. So I want to explore just another quick area around the data before we go into what will be the home stretch. And of course, the most important thing, what needs to happen next, what can be done, because action must be favored over talk at this time. But Smriti, the focus a lot of the time tends to be on personal data when we talk about biases, and we worry about prejudices for individuals in terms of access to opportunity, insurance, health, bail in courts. We have all these examples, and of course they're hugely important. But bias isn't just in personal data. It must show up particularly in climate data, I'd have thought, quite a bit. Do you have any examples or references you can provide to us about biases in perhaps a different area of data, perhaps in Earth observations data or local government data that is being used to build climate resilience?
Is that a question for me?
It was a question for Smriti, but it's a hard question. So if anybody wants to assist, I would understand.
That's an area I've got absolutely no.
If we can't answer it, that's okay. But I thought we'd try. What do you think, Smriti?
Yeah, so that's obviously a very nice question. So the problem usually is that these data are not complete in the first place. So like there's a lot of holes in the data. Like when I was working on a project for the government, for Switzerland's government, and we received data from some MDs in Switzerland, and it was supposed to be a healthcare data, which was personal data supplied to us through the hospitals. So the problem was that a lot of those data were not like filled in the first place. Even the categorical data such as smoker, non-smoker, diabetic, non-diabetic, those data itself weren't like complete. Once we were also working with some real estate companies in Lithuania, and there the problem was that the data was very outdated. And now again, if we want to deal with something like climate change, when we have like a limited amount of time here to like we have to sequester 300 gigatons of carbon by 2030, so we have like 9.5 years now. So if we have data for like 2 years back, that's going to be such a huge problem, right? Like we need to understand how it's progressing now. Also, when it comes to something like carbon sequestration, where this is a huge problem actually. So what happens is that once we want to calculate how much carbon is being sequestered, we have to sort of go in and check how much carbon is stored in X number of trees or X area of land. So what happens is people usually just go to a particular area and they do a manual like checking. So if it's like a 500 hectare area, they calculate it for like 10 hectares and they extrapolate the results to the rest. So now there are people who are paying for the carbon credits for the entire area, and they don't know if in some other area there is a tree or not. There might have been forest fire, there might have been like some trees might have been cut down, but no one realizes that. And that's one that leads to lack of trust in the carbon market. And then people don't want to put in money here because they don't understand if it's legit or not. So here there's a huge problem of transparency, trust, and even accessibility, because it's the whole process is extremely expensive. Like imagine there's a land in South Africa and they fly a team of 25 experts from America to South Africa, and then they do carbon sequestration, like carbon verification, monitoring, reporting, verification process. It's extremely expensive. So anyone who has a land lesser than 1200 hectares, they are not ideally eligible for this entire thing because it makes the process non-profitable for them. So these are some problems in like climate space. And like carbon sequestration is a key step to tackling climate change. And what we do is we use satellite data for that. So we have some agreement with European Space Agency. So through that, we get satellite data directly, and we monitor those on like, ideally it's done once every 3 to 5 years. We do it biannually. So we check the amount of carbon that's been stored like twice a year, and we can pinpoint the trees and show them that, okay, these are the trees that you're paying for, or these are the trees that you have been sequestering and taking care of. So there the problem was that there was no proper data to begin with, like in most cases. Yeah, does that answer the question?
It does. Those are good examples. Thank you very much. In the interest of time, let's move a little bit of a gear change in the conversation, but hopefully continuing on this theme. Vibhav, there was some questions came up about the legal opportunities. How far can international law solve the vast problem of AI? Started a small debate on there. Since you're in their industry, it seemed that maybe we could just hop back into that one. And if you have any references around climate as well, then brilliant. But if not, that's okay. Can you pick that one up?
Sure. So the question I understand was that can international law solve the problem of AI, can solve the bias problem? I think uh, there are two, three quick points that one must understand if you're looking at and let me answer this from a broad legal regulation perspective. International law fundamentally is based on multiple years of state practice on a particular issue. Now that the AI is a fast evolving field, international law in that sense doesn't fit clearly, but what we have to the way this could be done is that there has to be a twofold approach if you're looking at it from legal solutions. One is the impact. Supposing if there's an AI system, two phases. One, an AI system being developed. Two, an AI system already in the market. When an AI system is being developed, before it comes into the market, you have to have certain compliance mechanisms, probably audits, far more if you're using personal data, better data protection laws. And we know we speak a lot about GDPR, but GDPR is limited only to certain region of the globe. We don't have it in other continents, so we have to look at it holistically. Development is taking place everywhere, so that the personal data protection bit, and then you have an element of AI audit. When you're looking at it from, and within those AI audits, within an audit or assessments, you could look at resolving bias along with other issues. The other aspect of it is if you're in the market and you are creating a biased result, what mechanisms do you put in place to solve the problem? How do you empower companies who are developing the model? How do you empower consumers and users who are impacted by the problem? And what sort of clarity do you give to decision makers? If it's an enforcement mechanism in court, what sort of legal clarity do you provide to them to adjudicate on this issue? We only have the EU regulations, which is in draft, which is the first um, draft in terms of the EU on regulating AI. Bias is a component of it, but we are yet at a very nascent stage from a legal standpoint in terms of addressing issues of AI. So I think both will happen simultaneously, if that
Are,
answers the question. Yeah.
are we behind the curve, Vibhav, legally?
I would say that it is impossible to legislate or regulate well before time. I think law will always play catch up. The question is what conversations we are having while it is playing catch up. If we build mechanisms for compliance before you enter the market, as well as have an eye out on what is happening after it is in the market, we would probably play catch up faster. If you're able to articulate the severity of the issue in different directions that helps policymakers, we would move faster. But
Mm.
as a practical matter, it doesn't seem likely that law would move at the same pace as technology, or would move at the same pace as business. I mean, I think it would not, it practically probably doesn't make sense.
Mm. Yeah, it's very difficult. I mean, look at what's coming through in spatial computing, extended realities, what's being called the metaverse. Very difficult to see what kind of legal structures are going to be needed. We've got 18 minutes on the clock. I just want to pick up a couple of questions. I think the one I was looking at is from Paul Levy, who's supposed to be on holiday. So anyways, I'm not sure why he's logged in here, but we're glad to see him. So Mike and then Vibhav, you mentioned about the EU regulation. Yes, very positive. But remember, I like to get the stats out. Remember these stats, that investment into AI in the EU, AI and blockchain, in fact, is 7%. Investment into AI and blockchain from China and the US combined is 80%. So for all the will in the world, and we have we have the quantity and quality of AI researchers in Europe, I promise you, but we do not have the investment, we do not have the startups. And what's that going to mean when countries are offered the US model or the red model for AI in the future around the world? Your Colombias and your Azerbaijans and your Moroccos. I mean, what are they going to want? Are they going to want an EU legislation document, or are they going to want China's AI? I mean, these are the big, real, actual, geopolitical questions that we're going to be dealing with. And then I think this is Paul's question. Why do we need to eliminate bias? Well, that's a great question, but it's not the one we're asking, because we said, how do we solve the problems that bias is causing in our systems, rather than how do we remove bias? So I'd love to hear another revert on that. And now I can't keep up with the chat because it's gone on too long for me to be able to read. So I'll catch up on that in a moment. But actually, Marissa's question, Aruna, might be one for you, actually. The first step into removing bias is knowing it's there. Does the panel have insights on techniques for removing blind spots and uncovering bias in the input data or the output decisions? Aruna, if you can give me a nod, and that's something that you're happy to speak to. And if you answer as you're unmuting, if you could maybe reflect on your thoughts on big tech doing this, Google, IBM, and others, and how relevant they are, whether it's paradoxical that they want to help maybe a problem that they caused. and then we'll come back to that main question, which is blind spots in the input data and output decisions. If you could give us some thoughts on that, please.
So, which question of can I just re-look at the question again?
You absolutely can, because using the magic of technology,
there you go.
It's on our screen.
Insights on techniques removing the blind. Okay, yeah. So yes, I think this is actually you coming into the question of how do we address the bias issue that we have. There is a few steps that we can take to actually mitigate, reduce bias, but not completely eliminate. Right. So the things I would say is there's it's got process, it's got data, it's got a few things that you need to look at holistically. I would say is have a framework or a process or a procedure or a checklist to help the person who is building the AI system. So I always say go with the risk-based approach, right? So based on what the impact the AI system is going to have the right level of controls in there. So knowing how what is the impact your AI output is going to give. In uncovering bias in the input data is you have to first train the data. You need to look at find out what sort of data you've got. Does it have the diversity that you are looking for that particular problem you're trying to solve? And then the quality of the data is also very important factor. Now, if your data doesn't have the diversity you're looking for, then you need to get more data. That's where I was talking about the synthetic data sort of playing that very key role, right? So you have to do a lot of analysis of that is very important. You need to spend a lot of time on input data. It's not the algorithm, right? What you feed into the algorithm, that's where the problem is. So you need to do a lot of analysis, find out the quality of the data, find out whether it is addressing the diversity range that you're looking for that particular problem. And then based on that, you need to decide either I go and get more data or add more diversity into it, or go and get the synthetic data, all of that stuff. Those are the things that I would say you need to look at to uncover bias before it's been implemented in the system. I hope it sort of answers the question person was asking.
I think it's very helpful. Marissa, I think, is still on the chat. If she wants to comment further on that, I'll be very glad to see that. Paul's come back. Smriti, coming to you. So Paul's come back and asked about the mathematical models of express bias that could create more accurate assessments of the elements of bias, enabling us to identify and manage it more effectively. To simplify that, and I might get this wrong, but there's a question there about if AI ultimately is a pattern recognition system, then bias is going to show up, isn't it? There's going to be patterns there that will show there's bias in data sets and outputs. Smriti, is that what your IBMs and others are trying to accomplish with their applications?
Yeah, so that's actually very accurate, like analogy that you used right now. So there are some applications. There's one application called What If, which helps detect the existence of bias in machine learning models. But it doesn't give you like straightforward way that you can use to remove bias. It's good to detect the existence of bias in the first place. Um, then there's AI Fairness 360 that IBM offers, which is an open source and comprehensive toolkit, which can be used both for detection of bias as well as elimination of bias in machine learning models. So this particular tool, it includes 10 different algorithms which can help you eliminate the bias if you have found like the existence of them. So these bias mitigating algorithms, they include optimizing the pre-processing stage, prejudice remover, and regular, and more. So we can use this tool to develop and build our own metrics and mitigation algorithms. So along with this, IBM also has proposed a rating system for the bias, which can be used to validate any machine learning application results. Yeah.
Thank you. That's very, very well articulated. Lavina, I'll come to you, Vibhav, in just a moment. Lavina, let me ask this question again and just see if I can get a straightforward answer from somebody. That sounds fantastic, what Smriti's describing. And I know there's others. We've got Synthesized on later on the forum with their own open source system, which may have some of the hallmarks of that. We'll find out more about it. But this is coming from, let's stick on IBM for a moment. Nothing personal about them, but they're a corporation with dividends and shareholders and profits. And we know that still our economy is based on companies putting profit here and then everything else, well, who cares, right? Somewhere down there. So are these the right tools coming from the wrong parts of the ecosystem here? Should the Turing Institute, should governments be launching these tools, where we perhaps have more transparency over the aims and objectives of these organizations? Lavina, any comments on that?
Yeah, I love it. Love the conversation at the moment. And for me, it's very much, firstly, we need to be able to understand the context of the problem in its complete entirety. At the moment, we very much love segmenting things, right? And when we talk about the biasness and the ethics of AI, you have to almost have that overall view. Whether or not we need more voices, yes, absolutely. Whether or not more people need to be involved, absolutely. Do we each need to take our own ownership of what we're doing? Absolutely. I'm a very firm believer in conscious creation and conscious thinking. So, in everything that you do and everything that you speak or everything that you act in should be a reflection of that, right? Gone are the days where, we have the mindset that, we leave it up to the legal people, or we leave it up to, governments, or we leave it up to, other entities like the large tech giants, just because they developed some sense of subconsciousness at the moment to say, yes, we've created this beast. Now, what do we do with it? It doesn't mean that it's going to naturally just dissipate, or they naturally going to find the answers for us. So, there's definitely that. But, having said that, we need to have an overall picture about this. One is we need to obviously raise the awareness, which we've done. Two is then getting to understand what exactly we're dealing with, right? The context of everything. And then the last bit is always around application. And if we dive a little bit deeper into the application portion, then we talk about, let's look at the development. Let's look at how we deploy it. Let's look at the monitoring, but all of this, again, is all underpinned by design, data, algorithm, or the model itself. And, so that in itself creates a lot more sort of a cross matrix, if you want to call it, in terms of us helping ourselves to figure this beast out.
Thank you. That's very, very helpful. Vibhav, I'm going to ask you to do a little summary as we draw a close in a few minutes from now. We've got 7 minutes on the clock. Let's just completely zoom out of this. We seem to spend a lot of time on the top down, the bottom up in these conversations. So what's going on with the users and those in the data set and the consumers, and what's going on with those that are creating them? We then try and factor in litigation and legislation, and so on as kind of external forces. But they're not the only ones. And we have a lot of sideways forces that come into our industries. And two right now are decentralized tools that are causing huge disruption in global markets. And of course, climate change. And these things mean that these conversations aren't static. The world is changing as we discuss these. So what about trust, Vibhav? Because we need to move to, trust has come up in this conversation, and that economy of trust looks like it's going to be very, very interesting. Do you think we're maybe getting a wider awareness that, if you can't look for the biases in your data, if you can't spot these and deal with them, then you're not trustworthy as an organization. So two parts to that question. Do you consider that we're moving more towards the economics of trust, particularly in digital and the technology space? And if so, our company's going to come undone by this being a clear and obvious way that they cannot be trusted if they're not taking the steps to do the kind of work that we're describing.
So the point on economics of trust, these are good questions. I think the artificial intelligence and the way it impacts everyone or may impact a person, the heterogeneous or lack of homogeneity in terms of how it's being adopted everywhere, I think developing trust in whichever mechanism, whatever way you do it, whether it be detecting bias is one of the issues that are relevant, I think is going to be to the core of organizations that are looking to adopt an AI. And trust will obviously it depends who the, again, the context here is depends who the organization would be, right? I mean, if you have a well established organization working on AI, then there is a certain element of trust that they will automatically bring to the table, and they might even have the resources to address issues of bias probably at a compliance stage, maybe through self-regulated principles, something that generates trust. But if the answer to the question, if you're moving to a trustonomics, I think so. I think that building trust and being successful in the market, especially for artificial intelligence, is going to be crucial, because the impacts of losing trust are severe, because you don't have that, for lack of better words, that liberty of time, that once you've lost trust, how do you get back, because all of it is new and not everyone is on the same page, right? So that's the first question. That's the answer to the first question. Can you repeat the second, please?
Do you think it's going to topple companies? Do you think those who can't
Again, I think that's going to be a mixed bag, because there are going to be companies that are, it depends what each company offers, I think. I mean, that is my personal understanding. There would be maybe decentralized technologies like blockchain could instill trust and could have a solution that is that is different from what other people are offering. But I think it will depend upon what the company is doing, where they're doing it, how much trust they've generally built in non-AI space, and how they're actually functioning. It's very difficult to answer this. I don't think it's a black and white answer. I don't think I think both big players and small players trying to make a difference, both will have their role to play if we are looking to move this conversation away from, say, particular regions and trying to have a proper global conversation impacting all regions. And I think both will play their role in their own way. So
Thank you
certain
very
places it
much.
might get, yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm using my eyes and my ears for different content as I read these incredible comments and listen. We're on 3 minutes on the clock. We do always start and finish on time. We've had a very, very engaged session today, which shows there's still a lot that needs to be designed and decided around this area of problems that come out of biases. With a few minutes on the clock, I'll open up the panel actually sort of, to take us home as sort of a last word on this subject for this particular session. The one thing to remember perhaps for our group, our community that's been involved today. I'm looking at Aruna. Do you have a last word on this, a takeaway, something for us to remember from this session? I'll unmute Aruna. There we go.
Sorry. Okay. So I think there's been a lot of good conversation. I think the one thing we want to take about is my favorite topic is the synthetic data. I think that is the answer for all the challenges we are having with data, with privacy, with data protection. And that's a topic that I'm doing a lot of studies to understand more about it. And I think it must be a must for every organization.
Thank you so much, Lavina. A takeaway that you hope will stay in people's minds from this session, if I can ask you for one?
Yeah, great. I think that, AI definitely is radically changing the world. And, I believe that ethics of AI is that which will determine what that world would look like. And this is something that was quoted, I think, by UNESCO. Solving the biasness is very much there. We have it. We can resolve it through deconstructing the biasness and rethinking AI. And how do we do that? We include fairness pipelines throughout our decision making, and we include auditing of data. So hopefully that's the great takeaway.
I love fairness, and I hate living in a world where 1% are trying to go to Mars and 50% can't get enough to eat. That's just a weird world.
I'm right there with you.
Just weird. So, Smriti, one takeaway. What do you want people to keep in mind?
Yeah, so I would first, these 2 points were really nice, so thank you. I would like to say that when it comes to technology companies, the representation of women or other communities is still really low. So it would really help if, like the inclusion and diversity aspect becomes more important at the point, which will also help to produce higher performing and more inclusive AI models or better results.
Wonderful summaries. Thank you for that. Vibhav, we've just ticked over the hour, but if I can ask you to close. Actually, I'll ask you to close in just a few seconds. So stay with us today. So this is our opening session of the day, unpacking the topic, the question. Then we move into our forum. You can find it mkai.org. It's run underneath my name here, next to my name. And you'll find today's event on there, a 2-hour session, again, on this topic, prepared speeches, panel, opinion pieces. It's going to be a big couple of hours. That's starting in 1 hour from now, so 5 p.m. UK time. And everybody welcome to come along to that. Vibhav, can you close for us today, please?
Thank you, Richard, and thank you for this absolutely fantastic panel. I'm just going to pick up a couple of points to summarize what we've discussed. First, we started off with Lavina making the point that there's unconscious bias. Then Aruna went on and said that when we take unconscious bias in framing the problem or collecting the data, that's when the bias issue comes in. Moving the conversation to what it will take to solve the bias problem, the points that if of course everyone's given their take home, if is that one should keep in mind is we should build a good data foundation, synthetic data as a part of it. You have to look at the quality of data. You could probably get more data if the quality is not good. Smriti spoke about the IBM model that they're using for bias detection. She spoke about inclusion and diversity, and about how, and that ties in with the point that was made earlier about it has to be diverse, inclusive, neutral, and protects human rights. Coming to Lavina's great points, the point that struck with me, and which I think is very important in the larger context of things, is the ownership of what we're doing. We need to take ownership of what we're doing and being aware of what we're managing to do. And to close this final point, raising awareness, and the final point from my end is that when you're looking on bias, what it'll take to solve the bias problem, the one thing that you need to know, it's a 1-letter word, or it's just one word: ask the question why. AI is not solve it just because it's automated does not necessarily mean is the perfect solution. If you ask the question why, you may find something that you didn't think there existed before.
Wonderful. Well, I'm hugely grateful for everybody that's joined in this conversation, whether you've joined in with your microphone or your keyboard. It's all wonderful to see. I feel that we are making some strides forward. We're committed to this. Our mission is to put human sustainable values into AI. We will never stop. We will never rest until we've made some progress. So, Smriti, Vibhav, Lavina, Aruna, thank you for your generous use of time today to come and speak with me and speak with us, this community, and others on the chat. Wonderful to see you. We'll be doing this again the Thursday, this time next month. New topic, and just as exciting and interesting. But I hope to see everybody in an hour from now, or earlier if you want to come and say hi. I'll open the session about half an hour to see who's around, see who wants to say hello. And then we'll jump into later on tonight. So thank you, everybody, again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure to be